Hello there. Welcome to UK Column. I'm Ben Rubin, and I am delighted to be joined today by Paul Atherton, who is a filmmaker, playwright, author, artist, journalist, and social campaigner. And most importantly, for the context of today's discussion, a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, Manufactures and Commerce, more commonly known as the RSA. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you very much, Ben. Good to be here.
Good stuff. So, a lot of people, I think, will be familiar with the RSA. It is a very well-known name, certainly, but it'd be great if you could just give us a little bit of background to the organisation, when it was founded, what its purpose is, and some key milestones in its history.
Sure. Well, most people, as you say, will probably recognize it as the RSA. The actual original title was the Society for the Encouragement of Manufacturing, Commerce and Arts. It was set up by a gentleman called William Shipley, who was one of the early members of the London's first society, which was the Royal Society. Saw the Industrial Revolution coming, saw the way banking and mercantile credit was working in the City of London, and realized quite quickly that this was going to decimate the arts and crafts. So rather than arts as in fine art, it was the arts and crafts. It was the thatchers, the silversmiths and the steelmakers. And he thought, well, how do I protect this? How am I going to be able to make sure that that group has a voice? And rather than trying to battle this oncoming industrial revolution and this oncoming nature of banking, he went, no, I'll just make it as important as those other two. And so he's founded the society with the principles basically of protecting those sort of crafts and arts in those environments, which by our terms today, we call them working class roles, but obviously they are very artisan roles and very specialist roles, but they were about to be replaced by sort of the mass manufacturing, the mass industrialization of what was coming in Britain. So our original idea basically was founded to say, hey, here's a group of people, we should protect it. It's not all about money. It's not all about growth and industry. It's about people. And there are a lot of people in Britain that are going to be decimated by this. We should embrace them and encourage them. So that was the original ethos of the organization back all the way in 1754. And we have, at its essence, always been a charity. And we were a charity before the notion of charity existed. So we had a King's Charter that basically said, yes, you can behave like this. You don't have to be in a business model. You can do these things for the population. And as the years progressed and the centuries passed, we morphed to adapt to the ages. The thing most people will know about the Royal Society of Arts, if they have any interest in it, is it was the organization that came up with the notion of blue plaques. So when the Industrial Revolution was knocking down lots and lots of architecturally important buildings to build massive factories, the RSA went, bad idea. We need this architecture. This architecture is important. And the way they thought to protect this was say, hey, look, someone famous lived here. Don't knock this house down. And that became incredibly powerful tool. Wasn't always successful, but it did shift people's opinions about what they were knocking down. So a lot of the buildings that remain with blue plaques on them was a direct consequence of the Royal Society of Arts. And it was, again, part of that ethos of protecting things and looking after things and nurturing a more important asset to human nature than just give us the money. And so we then come into sort of the 1800s. And again, the RSA steps up when Britain needed to place itself on the map and came up with Prince Albert, who was our then president, and Henry Cole, who was at the time, all this prior to 1912, we were known as members. After 1912, we became fellows. He was a member, and he said, look, we need to create the greatest, biggest structure that's ever lived on the planet to demonstrate just how wonderful we are at trade. But more importantly, he was trying to raise funds to build what was then going to be the South Kensington Museum. Now, the South Kensington Museum, as most people today would know it, is the Victoria and Albert Museum. But he goes, well, how do we fund this? So they set up the Great Exhibition, this amazing glass structure that sat in Hyde Park and then latterly moved to South London, which is now known as, of course, Crystal Palace, and housed all these amazing works from across the world. And they crowdfunded that. They went out to the public and said, look, we want to build the biggest structure in the world. Will you help us do it by giving us a donation? And people did. And then they charged people to go into that structure. And the figures for that were amazing. There were about 100 million visitors over a period of time. And they came and they saw this thing and they paid to get in. And that money was meant to raise enough to open the South Kensington Museum. It didn't just do that. It raised enough money to build the Science Museum, the Natural History Museum, the Royal Albert Hall, and latterly the Albert Memorial. That area then became known as Albertopolis. But again, the essence of that, the Victorian Albert Museum was originally a teaching museum. It was designed for the working class to come in and learn. It had the world's first ever cafe. And that cafe was a working class cafe. If people would finish their jobs, come in, they'd be able to get a really hearty meal for very little money, and they would have night classes there free of charge. And again, so that this is the essence of the RSA and has been pretty much up until the point really about 25 years ago, in the turn of the millennium. And then we started to turn into something vastly different. And we had the appointment of the CEO, and with Tony Blair's idea of the third sector, which kind of came in with his election in 97, we started to become a business. And as that's evolved, now we are, well, we don't know what we are in truth. We're not really a charity. We're far more interested in generating money and then not giving it to anything charitable. So that, as condensed as I can do it, that's pretty much its highlights and its history.
Amazing. So this is part of the bedrock of the nation, ultimately, right? I mean, talking about incredible heritage and culture. I had no idea about the blue plaques. So that's fascinating, and sounds like it was directly responsible for what did you call it, Albertopolis? I mean, that's basically half of Knightsbridge, isn't it? You know, it's been built on the back of this thing.
I did love the fact that when Henry Cole was looking at the area, it was called Brompton, and he didn't like the name of Brompton because it sounded sort of down market and cheap, and he wanted to feel salubrious. And of course, it is south of Kensington. Kensington Gardens just up the top of the road. And so he named the museum the South Kensington Museum, even when the area of South Kensington didn't exist. And the tube station latterly came and named itself after the museum, and he got his accomplishment by changing the name. But yeah, I mean, the very ethos of the RSA, when most of our young fellows come in, I ask them, have you heard about the RSA? And actually quite a lot of young people have not. But then I ask them, have you ever taken an OCR exam? And they go, oh, yeah, I've taken OCR exams. I say, well, that stands for Oxford, Cambridge, and the Royal Society of Arts, because it was the RSA that came up with the idea for the standardized examination. So it is literally the essence, as you say, the bedrock of a British society, and pretty much everything that we do and sort of the nature we do in some way has come from the Royal Society of Arts. You look at things like the Royal Academy, for instance. Joshua Reynolds and Thomas Gainsborough were both sort of presidents in different times, and they clashed over what the word arts meant. And Gainsborough was very much still arts and crafts. Reynolds was kind of going, no, we should be evolving now. This should be arts. So the first ever summer exhibition that was ever held in Britain was held in the Great Room at the RSA on John Adams Street. But when Reynolds couldn't get his way, he bought Burlington House on Piccadilly and set up the Royal Academy. So there are all of these kind of spin-offs in the Royal Institution of people realizing that we need to educate the masses, we need to engage people in culture, engender a sense of community, and build on that platform. And that has been the driving force of our organization for 270 plus years.
Fascinating. I hadn't realised it was linked into the Royal Academy as well. And that distinction between crafts and arts and practical things that people do on a daily basis almost, but are still creative versus the kind of high arts of sculpture and portraiture and the more conceptual modern arts that have come along in the past century or so. I think that's absolutely fascinating to see how those two things have actually kind of come from the same place. Really, really amazing. Now, you've mentioned that it's a fellowship. Can you describe a bit more about what that actually means, and also maybe some of the names that we might recognise who've been fellows of the RSA over the years?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, the notion of a fellow didn't really come until the early part of the 20th century in 1912. But it was a way of distinguishing people that were involved with the Royal Society of Arts as not just being members. Yeah, you were embraced into an organization. You were, if you can imagine it, like a Christian fellowship, a group of individuals all working for the betterment of each other and the betterment of society. And it was, to begin with, it was considered an honor. The post-nominals that we use, the FRSA, Fellow Royal Society of Arts, which you can use after your name when you become a fellow, was also a very quick and easy way to recognize other people with sort of similar thinking or a similar ethos. Because one of the great things about the Royal Society of Arts is it really has encaptured people from all walks of life. It's included people like Marie Curie. It has included people like Karl Marx, you've got the birth of communism and the birth of capitalism with Adam Smith, have both been fellows. Tim Berners-Lee is a fellow, the creator of the internet. Johnny Ives was a fellow who obviously designed the iPod and the other Apple product. These people who have genuinely shifted how the world works in one guise or another have sort of come in, embraced, but they've not always agreed. The one thing that they all agree on is that we want to make the world a better place. Marx obviously came about from one perspective, Adam Smith came from another, and as we've seen, people like Stephen Hawking who've come through. They're all people that have an amazing idea, an amazing sense of improving people's lives, and that's everybody's lives, not their lives per se, but generating something that benefits British society as a whole. And I think it comes back to that notion that you're uniting in a group of people with a singular goal, which is to make Britain a better place. But how we get there, we may not agree on, but we debate, and we do so in a reasoned manner. That was the whole point of the institution, is it brought these great thinkers, because the best ideas do not come from a single person. The best ideas come from being challenged and being forced to present an argument in such a valid and immovable way that everybody then goes, oh, actually, this is the way to go. So if you look at the history of how Henry Cole and Prince Albert eventually got Crystal Palace built, it was because they both believed in what they were doing. It was an incredibly arduous task. It wasn't an easy thing. We talk about it now as if they just went, oh, hello, let's do this, and off they go. But of course, it wasn't. There were lots of politics involved. There was lots of machinations about judging who was actually going to construct this thing. There was lots of fear that they wouldn't raise the funds. What happens if it all collapses? This is one of the biggest things that Britain is ever going to do, and on it goes. But because they were successful doing it that time, when we came to do the Festival of Britain a century later, there was a lot of that gambit and a lot of that tactic that was already embedded. So the society was able to go to government and state and go, look, let's create this amazing thing on the South Bank to, again, celebrate the genius of Brits, the amazing craftsmanship, the amazing workmanship, the way we're standing way above the rest of the world in terms of technology and everything like that. So that fellowship is this idea of joining in, or previously you had to be invited, then you could apply, but you had to choose, prove your worth. Now, we are far more like a membership where you just pay your money, you can get in and you can use your post-nominal. So the idea of fellowship and that united of people is diminishing rapidly, sadly.
Which is absolutely crucial and to the point of what we want to talk about today, right? Because the reason that you and I first met is that I had it had come to my attention. I can't remember exactly where from. That there were some rumblings coming out of the RSA, some disquiet, some industrial action, even I think, had taken place over the past year or so, and this has all happened under the I want to say current CEO, but I think he might have just left, Andy Haldane, formerly of the Bank of England, which we'll no doubt get into as we go along. But it sounds like this transformation from a fellowship focused on a higher purpose, the improvement of the nation, the protection of our heritage, is this kind of degradation of that core purpose has been happening for a little while. And I think you mentioned Matthew Taylor a little while ago, who was the chief executive before Andy Haldane, who, if I remember correctly, was actually quite a senior advisor to Tony Blair at one time.
Yeah, that's quite correct. So Matthew Taylor was the first ever chief executive officer. It was a new role. I have yet to be able to get to the bottom of how we went from voting for the person that led our institution, as we all fellows have voting rights in the charity, to this external appointment by somebody that just goes, oh, he's going to run the organization now, which seems like counterintuitive to everything we stand for, really. But that predated me becoming a fellow. I became a fellow in 2000 and what are we now? 2025, 2018, 17. But I'd been involved with the RSA, well, pretty much since I was in school. I mean, I used to, the Royal Institute Christmas lectures was something I was very excited about and became part of my Christmas tradition. And the Royal Institution had a strong connection to the Royal Society of Arts. When I was 16, I took an RSA typing exam, so I became affiliated through their examination board that existed at the time. And then by the time I moved to London when I was in my mid-20s, I used to go regularly to the public talks, and I'd always aspired to become a fellow there. It was one of those sort of aspirational things you had as a, well, not very few did, but certainly as a Valley's child growing up under a Thatcher's Britain, it was kind of like, oh, that's where you want to be. You want to be with this amazing ethos and this amazing culture and this amazing group. So that was always an aspiration. So when I was invited by a friend of mine who nominated me, I was just over the moon. And I remember that, you know, in the great room, there is a mural that took 25 years to paint. And I just literally stood actually and sort of admired that for a good part of chunk, because I felt like I'd actually become part of this institution. So all the way through its history, it was this idea of a group and looking after itself and looking after its members. And then the appointment of a CEO seemed counterintuitive to that. As I say, I don't know the mechanics of it or how it was achieved. But Matthew was there. As you say, he was one of Tony Blair's right-hand people, senior advisors. And he, from what I could tell, basically turned the RSA into a classic think tank, where basically we're sort of bunging out reports and we're not really doing anything. You know, we're holding conferences and things. I mean, the lecture series has always existed with the RSA, so that continued as it's always done. But this idea of moving away from getting a group of people to find a solution to a problem was now, oh, we're going to employ some people that work at the top of the organization, and the fellows can just pay their funds to fund that research that will then either give or sell off to somewhere else. And there was a distinct shift. And fellows that I spoke to had been there considerable time felt that was not really the way to be going. Many people just kind of went, it's not really having that much of an impact on us. We're still uniting and doing what we're doing in the house, which is on John Adams Street, just off Strand here in London. But there was a distinct shift. But when Andy Haldane came in, that really shook everybody, because nobody understood why a former chief economist of the Bank of England, who had never been a CEO in his career, had not really any third sector experience, had certainly not had any diverse experience outside of banking. His entire career since he left university was in one job, progressively, but nonetheless with the Bank of England, and that was it. So he was coming into the most multidisciplinary organization that probably exists in the world, where everybody comes from different backgrounds, different careers, different ideologies, and was now going to lead this organization to where nobody was really sure. In addition to that, he was getting paid to run a charity more money than he was being paid to be the chief economist of the Bank of England, which all slightly took us back. And some of those revelations took a little time to come to light. As you rightly point out, when he came in, he immediately started clashing with staff to such a point that for the first time ever in the Royal Society's history, the staff required to unionize. And this was huge because you have to remember, prior to these CEO appointments, staff were fellows. So by definition, any problems, it would be sorted communally. There'd be no reason to have an us and them. There wasn't management. It was just all fellows. And suddenly subcontractors were coming in, catering were outsourced. People had, front of house staff that had worked there for decades and decades and decades were suddenly sort of poo-pooed and said, oh, we're moving you to this outsourced company. You can't renegotiate. And so basically the whole of the existing staff, which is the organization was run roughly on about 35, 40 people. The majority of them decided to join a union and retaliate against this. And yes, we had lots and lots of industrial action, much of which was publicized to the detriment of the organization, but that didn't seem to bother the trustees, which I always found slightly strange. And to the point that we have now literally had over 100% turnover of staff. So that nearly anybody that existed when I first joined, and those people were committed to the organization for life, they weren't temps or anything, as I said, they'd worked for decades, had all gone. And even some of Haldane's own appointments, who he sort of brought in under big fanfare, went as quickly as they arrived, and often under very dark clouds, to the point that one of our members of staff was dismissed, took an unfair dismissal tribunal and won it. Now, we're supposed to be a charitable institution that's all about uniting people, and yet here we have this structure where the CEO is seemingly so disconnected from the very ethos of what we do. It's had no association with us whatsoever in its entire history. And he's meant to be running this organization and seemingly just running it into the ground.
Incredible. So you got a stable, robust, mature, extremely valuable institution that's run in a very specific way, and then you have two new leaders come in who essentially just completely disrupted this thing and turned it from what it was into something it's not. I think essentially it sounds a bit like what we've seen happening across the government over the past 30, 40 years, right? The introduction of private contractors, the changing of people's employment contracts, like all of that kind of thing. There's lots of parallels here with what we've seen happen around central government, I think, under various different governments.
Yeah, I think we've seen it across the board. I think that this was the birth of the third sector. This idea that we should treat our charities as if they're businesses, and bringing in so-called CEOs on these ridiculously high salaries to operate them as if they're businesses, when in fact they're not, and they never have been or ever should be. They are charities. The whole point is that they should be supplying something charitable. But often you see these organizations now, as you rightly point out, you privatize absolutely everything. And then the only thing that matters to anybody in those institutions is revenue. And seemingly that revenue is only being generated to pay the staff that aren't needed to deliver the things not being delivered. I mean, it just seems about the most insane scenario that you've got, that we have taken the very word charity, which if you look at the sort of English dictionary definition, it's giving to the poor, and gone, yes, well, we could do that, but alternative, it's much better to raise donations and funds and make my own nest with it. At 200,000 a year, Andy Haldane is, that's a large proportion. We've gone from 39 staff to over 100. with many of these titles, as David Graeber says in his book Bullshit Jobs, you're kind of going, they're just made up. We've got a director of fellowship and a fellowship director. There are departments with 3 managers and only 1 member of staff. And you go in, this is just ludicrous. But again, there doesn't seem to be anybody overseeing this. The trustees don't seem to be challenging this ethos. In fact, they seem to be encouraging it. The outcome of all this is that fellows who've been fellows for decades and decades and decades resigned en masse. We've almost lost a quarter of our fellowship. We were nearing 40,000 and we're now just over 30,000. And many of those fellows now are being brought in not really as fellows. They're just people who are, as I said earlier, just paying their membership fees and joining. We've got these 2 very weird setups where we're bringing in people in America and Australia and different sort of banners. So whilst the RSA is sort of a UK charitable institution, these other things are sort of not for profits or community. I'm never quite sure what other countries do. But, again, it's just a way of bringing in revenue, because what other countries do and how they think is vastly different to what Britain does and how it thinks. And that also felt an element of globalization coming into our own institution, where actually the very ethos of how we were founded is like, don't do that. we have crafts and skills and talents in this country that are unparalleled to such a degree that the world comes to us. There is a reason that Marie Curie was a fellow. She's French. There's a reason that John Logie Baird came up from Scotland with television. There's a reason that Mozart came over with his father and performed in London. It draws the greatest of talent from all around the world. And we should be proud of that. We should embrace that and encourage that. And again, this is why things like the Victorian Albert Museum was built, was to get the working class into these establishments, to encourage them, to help them learn and understand. And so to watch this get corporatized and profitized for the sake of the usual sort of, I hate to use the term 1%, but that is the essence of what it is this sort of small cabal group of individuals who are now, having not only taken over nearly the government, the corporations and everything else, have now managed to tap into the charities and turn that into their own revenue source.
It's just mind-blowing. I mean, it sounds like the organisation is imploding, frankly. I mean, if you're losing 25% of your fellowship down from 40,000 to near, I think I just looked on the website and it said that it's now 31,000. So you've got thousands of people who ultimately are it's not just about the membership that they're paying, it's also about their own personal contributions to the community and the whole kind of spirit and essence of the society. I mean, to what extent? I mean, some of the things you just said there are ludicrous, right? I mean, the idea that you've got 3 managers in a department with 1 employee, right? I mean, that's just crazy. I mean, is what we're looking at here? Is it just mismanagement, or do you think that there's something deliberate? I mean, are they actually trying to destroy it in some way?
I think you've got a double-edged sword. I think, as I mentioned, Andy had no affiliation with the Royal Society of Arts, had no understanding of what it was before he joined, had never had the role of CEO before. And so there was a level of just sheer incompetence that came in with that. But at the same time, we've got a board of trustees that includes the chairperson, Sandra Boss of BlackRock. And you're kind of going, well, why are these appointments kind of accepted? Because ultimately they're going to come in with that same old classic finance thinking. And actually what's required in an institution, an organization like the Royal Society of Arts, is a vast array of differing approaches and people with vast and differing backgrounds. And we just don't see that reflected. So I think on the one side, you've got somebody who is completely incompetent and unknowledgeable about the institution running it. And in the process of doing that, I believe panicked, created his own little cabal and just, surrounded himself with yes people. And in the process of doing that, managed to alienate the majority of active fellows. And on the other side, you've got people using it as profile for other things. Lloyd Grossman has just been appointed our chairman in the past year. Tim Miles was former to that, and again, they're both very institutionalized people. They come from very set kind of corporate worlds, and it's just not incongruent for something like the RSA. So I think it is one, it's incompetence, and the other, I think it is tactical, and I think we've seen it with Tufton Street and all the various organizations like the Adam Smith Institute and all the things that spin off of that, where these organizations are now tapping into cultural institutions that are well known to the public at large, but certainly within their own networks, as some kind of esteem badge, so that they can do off, oh, I'm the chair of this, or I'm the trustee on this board and things, and that helps in other career paths.
Certainly, it certainly does. I mean, this is just astonishing, really. This kind of globalization, I think, is fascinating. And I'm just looking at the trustee board here, and I can see that there's a significant board. We can talk a bit more about them in a moment, but then also the fact that you've got a separate board for the RSA in the US and for Oceania, and actually none of that has got anything to do with England or the UK or what the institution was originally set up to represent ultimately. Now, you talked a little bit about commercialization, but it sounds like, and actually you also used the term think tank earlier, which I think is quite interesting, given particularly the political background of Matthew Taylor, right, in particular, because that's certainly his world. So you've now got this thing which was all of the stuff that we've described, but they're now trying to turn it into a think tank slash. It almost sounds a little bit like a kind of Soho House type thing that they're going for. Does that resonate with you?
Sadly, yes, because one of the appointments of the head of fellowship actually came from Soho House. So he was the head of membership of Soho House, which everybody thought was a really weird thing, because a couple of points to note. The house, which stands on John Adam Street, which was designed by the Adam brothers, so it's got a myriad of Adam fireplaces, and goodness knows what the cost of that would be, but it obviously belongs to us. So it was bought and owned by us on that land. Is open to the public. So it is part of its charitable process at the library, the cafe, the sort of workspaces. Anybody can just go in. You have to sign in, but nothing prevents you from doing that. So we're not a membership house. You're not paying your money into the fellowship to get access to a building, which is how most membership buildings operate. The conduit is probably the closest and the most modern thing to the Royal Society of Arts, which I think has existed now for about 10 years. And their ethos is very similar to ours, but it's far more a classic membership style, where you pay thousands of pounds to get access to, a private area and private spaces that no one else can get access to. That is not true of the Royal Society of Arts on John Adam Street. Anybody can walk in, anybody can use the library, anybody can use the cafe. So the notion of kind of trying to structure it like a membership in that way is ludicrous, because you're like going, well, you don't need to pay to get into the building. So if it's access to the building, you have to just turn up. So the fellowship fees were originally structured to fund some of the organizations, but also to go to poor people there, help with the issues of the day. And so now it seems that the revenue source, as I said earlier, is simply to fund the wages of the staff that are now employed, not as it was originally to support the fellows, but to work off in its own little sort of operational thing with this banner of the RSA above it. And so, yeah, I mean, it is a strange thing to kind of go, oh, become a fellow, because, and if you look at any of the material these days, it's like, why would you become a fellow? It's kind of like, I think anybody with any intelligence, and we've seen it happen in the house, it basically became a very, very inexpensive WeWork. People started realizing, oh, I can come in and use this, and I'll put my computer up, and I haven't got to pay the fees of a WeWork office. And it changed the dynamic, and it changed the way people behaved in the house, and it changed everything. And again, that's part of its commercialization. But there is no real revenue source, nor should there be, from the fellows fund, which should basically be going to charitable purpose, which is helping poor people endure the sufferings of being poor.
Are they selling corporate memberships? Like, can companies come along and like buy them for their staff and that kind of thing now?
Yeah, again. I think that came under Andy's auspices. After the mass exodus of fellows, they've tried to get corporate memberships and all kinds of things. I think we've had a couple sign up. But you look at it and go, I don't see what the advantage is of a corporate membership, because access to the house is free. What are you paying for? You paid to be a fellow because you wanted to help other people. If you're just buying that, you'd be better off going to Soho House or Home House or any of the other modern clubs that now exist, or even any of the older clubs that still exist. So yeah, it's a strange idea to try and corporatize this in that way, and clearly it's failing. It's not working for them because they're losing revenue. The house has always been hired out as a venue. So, weddings are a big revenue source for the institution, and sort of other big events and filming and all that kind of things. Because obviously, we're quite an old, and we're listed. I think we're grade. If we're not grade 1, we're grade 2 star listed. And so it's a great venue to do great things, and that's a revenue source, and that happens on the weekends. So that, again, the club doesn't open on the weekends, so it isn't a home house. It's very much kind of working environment of Monday to Friday. Although we have now got a new bar.
Sounds like there's a bit of an identity crisis going on down there, and a lot of value extraction, frankly, right? Because you mentioned the actual physical building on John Adams Street, and I can attest to the fact that it is a beautiful building in an astonishing location. And it sounds like some people have come along and gone, oh, we'd like a bit of that, we'll take that, and we'll make as much money as we can out of it in a very cynical fashion. You mentioned to me when we spoke the other day some, frankly, really quite troubling stuff about the archive. It'd be great to hear a bit more about that and what's been going on with the assets that the society has been entrusted to care for. Frankly, that it doesn't appear to be doing that anymore.
No, I mean, this is probably, I would call this the worst type of cultural vandalism I have ever encountered in my entire life. So when I first became aware of the Royal Society, I was very aware of its archive. It had a brilliant archive display out, and the things that are kept in the archive are obviously the classic things you'd have with any organization, minutes and meetings and things. But these minutes include people that invented electricity, the first demonstration of the telephone in Britain. These are amazing things. Plus the fact we have an art collection, much of which is on loan to the National Gallery. And Eve, who's the head of archive, had been there 12, 13 years. And suddenly, in the last 6 months, the entire department, everybody now has been either let go or pressured out. Or one of my friends who volunteered in the archive was just ceremoniously told never to come back again. And there doesn't seem to be anybody now protecting this archive, which, as you rightly point out, this should be considered a national archive. This is the nation's work. And some of the most important inventions and creations have come out of the Royal Society of Arts, and some patents. And it's just an amazing thing. And it's some of it is actually in the building. Other parts of the archive are elsewhere. But the issue is now which I'm sure we'll come on to. I've had a conflict with the RSA, and in checking the new rules that they've created, they now have the auspices to be able to sell anything they want to generate revenue for the Royal Society of Arts. And you're like going, well, that shouldn't be a thing. You shouldn't just be able to flog off whatever you want to, whenever you want to, if you're losing money. But again, nobody seems to care. I've raised it with the Charity Commission. They don't seem to care. I've raised it with the trustees. They don't seem to care. And it's seemingly, the only people that do care are genuine fellows, and most of whom, sadly, now have resigned their fellowships and moved on elsewhere.
Unbelievable. I mean, This really concerns me, right? I mean, I think you used the term cultural vandalism. I would agree completely. People are basically selling off national assets for their own benefit and to the total detriment of the nation. And this is happening at the RSA. It's happening everywhere else as well. Absolutely appalling behaviour. And the fact that they're actually rewriting their own governance essentially to make this okay as well. I mean, it's just so cynical to hear this kind of thing.
Yeah, but as you say, I think it's commonplace. There just doesn't seem to be anybody in Britain right now that there are no grown-ups left, is what I would say. There's nobody coming in going, well, yeah, that's a really silly idea. Now you shouldn't do that, should you? No, put the nice painting back. Um, they're just not doing it. And for me, the most disappointing thing was the Charity Commission. I genuinely thought when I raised this with the Charity Commission that the least that they would do was go and investigate to see what's gone. Because I mean, none of this seems to be public. I'm only aware of the archive department going because I was working so closely with them. It was shocking, and especially because Eve was so well respected amongst the archive community. If you go, to any other institution and talk about Eve, she was always held very, very highly amongst people because she was so good at her job and understanding how precious these items are and how important it is to keep these things logged and protected at a time when a lot of archivists are going, oh, we don't have money, we can't do this, we can't. She didn't do any of that. She was like, no, this is my life's work. I'm going to, and it's for the best. Once again, it's for the betterment of everyone in Britain. And that's how people should think. And that's how all the fellows used to think. But sadly, that's no longer the case.
Indeed. So it sounds like you've been making a bit of a nuisance of yourself so far as the trustees and the board would probably have it inside the RSA, and frankly blowing the whistle on some inexplicable and inexcusable behaviour, frankly. Could you talk to me a little bit about that, this process that you've been going through and how you've been targeted?
It all started with an idea a long time ago that a woman called Anne Longley and I were chatting some years ago at a London Fellows meetup down in Greenwich. And I've got a tech background and she is a tech. And we were both going, we should have a platform where we can share ideas and quickly connect with each other and say, I'm doing this, let's get a group together, who's in, type thing. And I'm really bad at kind of not being quick and proactive. So if I pick something up, I run with it and I get the job done. So a lot of people used to ask me, so Paul, where do you get your funding from for your films? And I'm like, well, every project's different. But one thing I can guarantee you is I never get grants. And they go, why? And I say, because it takes a grant maker 3 months to make a decision. And in that time, I will have come up with the idea, made the film, put it out there and moved on to the next project. So I immediately started hitting the sort of bureaucratic brick walls, and I kind of went, okay, well, that's clearly not. However, Anne picked up the ball and ran with it, and over about a 2.5, 3-year period, eventually persuaded the RSA to build a social media platform, basically a sort of a LinkedIn for RSA. Sadly, though, it morphed into something neither of us had hoped, and it basically became a third-party product bought from the States. It's a white label product called Circle, and it works exactly the same way as every other social media platform. And you basically buy it, bang your name on the front of it, and present to your audience that it's yours. So anyways, as part of the innovation team of this, I was asked to beta test it, and I got on there, and the first thing I spotted was the terms and conditions were the exact same as Twitter or Facebook's, which was completely anti the RSA's data protection rules. So I brought it to their attention, went, hey, whoa, whoa. This Circle thing shares your data and it links you to other platforms and they can sell your information. And it's fine if people want to do that, because plenty of people use Facebook and LinkedIn and all the other things, but they need to be aware of this. And I got an email back going, yeah, Paul, absolutely. Thanks for bringing this to our attention. We'll make sure it's up front and center that this is a third-party product, and that you're actually coming out of the RSA's own sort of data protection rules. And I thought that's perfectly acceptable. Everybody knows what's going on. We move on from there. What actually happened is they buried it in the terms and conditions of the RSA. And when you sign up to Circle now, it just says, you're an RSA member, click here to join Circle. And for the majority of people, they just think it's an RSA product, which it isn't. And so that was my starting conflict, because people then said, oh, you're trying to dissuade people from signing up to Circle. And they clearly spent a lot of money on this. When I asked why they didn't use an open source product, I was told that, oh, it's open source confused some of our older fellows. And I'm like, well, I'm not buying that, because most people who work in open source came from Gen X and boomers. Most people who are sort of Gen Z and millennials don't even know what open source is, let alone anything else. But anyway, but nonetheless, you can learn. You know, we're intelligent people. You can learn, and an open source product would mean it embedded with our ethos. And one of the biggest ironies is Amanda Brock, who is the head of Open Source UK, is a fellow. And nobody had thought to approach her and kind of gone, hey, Amanda, you're a fellow. What should we do with this? So again, it was a bunch of people knowing very little about the technology, asking another bunch of people who knew even less about technology about which technologies they use, rather than the resources, some of the greatest technological talent that we have as part of our fellowship. And I think that was a classic demonstration of why the organization is splitting up the way it is. And yeah, so I was seen as a troublemaker, and that was kind of the start. And I was mortified at the bad press we were getting during the Industrial Revolution, and I was also mortified about how fellows who were uniting together to try and support the staff and trying to be what I would consider fellows were being shut down consistently. They were being barred from coming into the building. They couldn't contribute. And so I wrote a Substack about it, called For the Love of Fellowship, and basically explaining my passion for the organization, how much I love it, how much I dislike what's happening to it at the moment, and trying to put a bit of a rallying call for any fellows that were in my sphere to kind of unite and push back against this sort of destruction, really, of our beloved institution. That resulted in the RSA management telling me that I had brought the organization into disrepute. And that claim has varied from me bullying staff members, allegedly, which actually, when you look at the evidence, and I've supplied that to you, of an email of the person that I'm supposed to have bullied, it was him bullying me and me saying, I'm not dealing with you anymore. You've upset me, leave me alone. And then him going, well, you've upset me now. And apparently that was me bullying him. Yeah, and according to our bylaws, oh no, so let's get this straight. So the first thing I hear about it, I get an email from Andy Haldane in one of the most ridiculous emails I think I have ever received from a living human being, saying, you cannot speak to other fellows or staff at the RSA. And I'm like, well, considering most of these people that I know at the RSA are my friends, are you telling me I can't communicate with my friends? And I didn't get a response to that. I then kind of escalated this up to Tim Isles, going, look, this is ridiculous. I mean, this is an embarrassing email from somebody that's supposed to be a chief exec, supposed to be professional, supposed to be empathetic, supposed to be compassionate. And actually, it's just telling me I can't do something because I've done something he doesn't like. That should not be acceptable to the chair of our institution. Tim, instead of investigating anything or doing anything, just wrote back to me saying, I've spoken to Andy and I agree with everything he says. And I was like, well, that's not helpful. So then I reached out to the Charity Commission going, look, this is a structure. We predate you, by the way. So, you know, as a charitable organization, we come under the King's Charter and not under the charity law. So that's going to be really complicated. We're also a voting fellowship, so we're unique in that in terms of charity. How do you treat us differently? And they go, we don't. We just treat you like a normal charity. So you're like, right, so you don't have enough law or understanding of what we're doing here. So they were a dead end. And yeah, and it culminated in this Substack. They then go, right, we're going to kick you out, Paul. So they dropped me an email saying, we had a meeting, we had a vote, you've got to go. But you do have, according to our bylaws, our made-up bylaws, you do have a right to an appeal. Would you like to an appeal? And I was like, well, yeah. It's like, that's a no-brainer. And so they set up the first meeting for this appeal, which they were going to do online. They said, you can't do it online, you're going to have to do it in person. And they said, oh, we're not doing that, we're not doing this. So basically, I had 2 rounds of appeal that I wasn't even present at. But they both sort of went, well, we can't agree to expelling you. until I got to my third and final round. And this was when Sandra Boss from BlackRock was on the panel, and the head of CIPD, and the former director of the House of Commons, first director of the House of Commons. And I'm sitting in this room with these three people, and we're going through what I've done wrong. And in the first round, I was like, I actually don't know what I'm trying to be expelled for, because it's been a moving target. First, it was because I was bringing the organization into disrepute. Then it's because I'm bullying staff. Now, I don't know what it is today. And they all agreed that actually it wasn't clear. They were going to go away. They were going to get this thing done. And then we came back to the next one. And in the next one, it should have been the final hearing according to the bylaws. There should have been no other hearing. This is full and final. Whatever the decision was at this meeting was going to be it. And the decision that came out of this meeting is that we cannot uphold the reason to expel you. Ergo, we're not agreeing with your expulsion, but we're not going to let you enter the house. It's like, what? And then we've also had a decision that we're going to bring some external person in to make the final decision. And I'm like, well, that's not in your bylaws. That's not what your bylaws say. And they're very, very, very clear, and they're very, very emphatic in this particular context. The rest of them are wishy-washy. But on this one issue, this final hearing had to be the final hearing, clear and emphatic. And they brought in somebody external who apparently did some reading, didn't get in touch with me on any level, didn't talk to me, didn't interview me, didn't ask me any questions. And said, oh, no, I agree that you should be expelled, so you're being expelled. And in this response, as again, you've got, they've actually gone, yeah, we broke the bylaws. We banned you from the building when we shouldn't have done. We did this wrong. We did that wrong. We did the other wrong, but it's all right because you're gone now. But I haven't. I'm still here. I'm still trying to figure this out.
Yes, it sounds like they manufactured an outcome that they were looking for to get rid of someone who was causing them an inconvenience. And yes, that's not that unsurprising, frankly, given a lot of what you just described to me, in terms of this takeover of the institution. Now, you have kind of mentioned a couple of people there. I'll just focus. You mentioned Sandra Boss. So she's actually the head of the chair of BlackRock UK, right? So these are very powerful, influential people. Is there anyone else on the board that people should be aware of that you think is, of particular interest?
I mean, the three people, and I can't. You'll probably be able to look at their names quicker than I. But one is the head of the CIPD, which is a charge in Institute of Personal Development. Of all the people you'd think would make sure that somebody in my situation would have been getting the best protections, would have been him. And the other was the former director of the House of Commons. So I mean, they were not inconsequential individuals by any stretch of the imagination.
So you've got Ian Ailes, who is the treasurer of the RSA.
Yeah.
So he was the Director General of the House of Commons.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then was there another man that you said?
The head of the CIPD.
David D'Souza. Yeah. Okay. There's some pretty serious people on here.
My friend Richard supported me in the meetings. And, one of the key things that we kept saying is, where's the evidence to back this stuff up? You claim that I bullied, you claim that I've done X, Y, and Z. Some of these things are to the level of, criminal activity, if you've been bullying someone to such an extent. But they didn't provide any. And, one of the most laughable things is that after we'd had this, they said, the RSA said, we've given them new evidence. I'm like, well, after the judgment, you've gone, that didn't work out for us. So I have some new evidence that I've never seen, ever. So I've never been able to comment on it or retaliate against it. So, yeah, as you say, it was clearly manufactured. But again, no protections. Nothing from the Charity Commission, nothing from the trustees. And I should point out that of all the sort of tick boxes in inclusivity, I'm probably the bingo card of them all, because I whilst I'm mixed race, I come under the banner of Black, Caribbean, other. I have a disability in that I suffer with MECFS. I am reliant on disability DWP payments. I've been homeless for 15 years. And you're like going, of all the people that an organization like the RSA should be rallying around and supporting and going, my gosh, you've got all that going on, yet you're still producing films, you're still, bringing attention to the public of the failures in various systems all across the UK to try and make other people's lives better. Their approach is, you're bothering us, go away.
Well, you're asking lots of inconvenient questions about what exactly it is that they're up to back there. That never goes down well. Okay, this is fantastic. Thank you so much, Paul. This has been really interesting. Just on a final point, at an institutional level, what would you like to see the RSA do and get back to in terms of its future direction?
Go back to what we were. Go back to a fellowship that elects its leaders, that is a group of individuals who come together to solve single problems. So, whether it's looking at welfare or money or health, that we go, right, okay, every time that there's been a major problem in Britain, it has been a group of people in the RSA who've got together and gone, if we do this, 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 and this, and here's the talent, and here are the expertise, and here are the connections, we can fix this problem in a matter of days or weeks or months. And that's what I want to see back. I want to see a fellowship of united, talented people with their core ethos about helping and supporting other human beings in the British Isles, being led by someone that they have elected to lead.
That sounds like exactly the kind of institution that we need to have in this country right now. That's been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for your time, Paul Atherton, FRSA. For all those listening and watching back home, thanks for watching.